So I will briefly just tell you that our speaker tonight, Dan Drasin, is a media producer and documentary filmmaker, and he's been studying the paranormal for many decades. And he's been very interested in past life, afterlife communication, and he's going to tell you all about his research that he's been doing for decades. So please welcome him.
Thank you, Julie. It's on. We all rolling properly? Thank you. Thank you to the entire FMBR crew for making this possible, and to all of you for coming this evening. I'd like to get right into the film as soon as possible and get through the intro quickly, so forgive me if I read from some prepared notes. First of all, how many here are new to the whole area of afterlife research? Nobody. Oh, one. Good. I was going to say how many are interested but skeptical, and I don't know if that counts here. And how many have studied this area in depth through the main focus of the study? Okay, thanks. Okay, just to introduce myself very briefly, I've been a media producer and a filmmaker most of my adult life. But running parallel to my professional life has been a lifelong interest in anomalies, things that don't fit the picture of reality that we were taught by our culture, our religions, our mainstream sciences, and our educational systems. This interest began actually with my experiencing, as a very young child, I experienced many precognitive dreams. So while I couldn't explain it, it was enough to know that something was going on backstage, that reality as I was taught to perceive it was not the whole picture. And that simple knowledge and that understanding stood me in good stead when I started to confront things like the UFO enigma and all kinds of weird stuff that we all know and love. Okay, let's fast forward to 1995, when I was first introduced to the whole field of afterlife communications. At first I was quite skeptical about it. Thought, well, is the CIA kind of tunneling into people's tape recorders and TV sets and trying to fool us into believing there's something there? But as I became more familiar with the field, most of my doubts pretty much evaporated. And so about 10 years ago, I began shooting an exploratory documentary about this field. In 2003, I was joined by co-producer Tim Coleman, and together we shot over 100 hours of video material in the US, England, Scotland, and Spain. Eventually, Tim and I went our separate ways, but we both retained all the copyrights to the video, and we're each editing our own versions of these documentaries and trying hard not to duplicate them somehow. Anyway, the one you're about to see is my own exploration of ITC, or instrumental transcommunication, which is communication with the other side through the instruments of modern electronic technology. Now, the purpose of this film is not to claim any definitive answers. It's mainly to examine the evidence, or some of the evidence, and maybe open minds up to new possibilities. At this point, all these studies are in their infancy, and it'll be interesting to see what directions they take over the coming years. I should point out that this is a rough cut, and there are 2 more sequences yet to come, which hopefully you'll be able to see on my website, hopefully by the end of this year, we'll see. And also that much of the material here was shot around 2004, 2005, 2006, so not all of it is up to date. And that will be explained and taken care of when the final cut is done. So if you have any feedback or suggestions, we'll have, or questions, obviously, we'll have a Q&A after the screening, and the screening will run just a little under an hour. Any immediate questions? Okay, if not, we'll we can turn the lights out and we'll roll the film. On because there's a little PowerPoint thing I'd like to show you here. So you've seen 9, let me just get back here. You've seen 9 sequences out of hopefully 11. I've been preoccupied with other things in the past few years and keep making excuses for not finishing this. But hopefully at least one more sequence will be done by the end of this year, and hopefully 2 more. The next sequence focuses mainly on visual ITC, communications coming through TV sets, anomalous photography, which is a favorite preoccupation of mine, and that sort of thing. I want to just briefly give you a preview of one of the fascinating aspects of visual ITC. This is a very unique kind of thing. It's called this is actually a Polaroid photograph of a young man taken in the presence of a machine called a illuminator. An illuminator was created by a fellow whose expertise was in the area of heating, ventilating, air conditioning, homeopathy, acupuncture, and craniosacral. And basically, it looks like a tall loudspeaker about this high with air grills at the top and the bottom. It's got little fans that circulate air through it. And in the middle is a plastic tube with hollow tubes wrapped around it containing a sequence of homeopathically energized liquids. And evidently the air passing through and around these coils is somehow charged with a field that allows intelligence and information from other levels to manifest physically. And one of the neatest ways this happens is through Polaroid photographs. Here, I'll show you just a few of them here. Liberate the microphone. This is actually almost a control photo. There's not a huge amount anomalous about it, except, let's see. Here you see, let me turn the lights off for a moment. Here you see some anomalous light streaks across the photo for which there's really no explanation. But otherwise it's a fairly straight photo. It's handheld, so there's a little bit of blurring in here. This photo was taken a few moments later. Let's do it full screen here. And here we see very clearly a second face superimposed on the first. It's distorted. You can see the eye is here at a funny angle. There's also a light streak across here that almost forms a cross with this fellow's ear. So I call this the Christ guy. Here's a close-up. You can see it in a little better detail. This is a photograph of me taken at just about the same time in the same circumstances. And here's my real image. I'm wearing glasses. And peculiarly, you see these two reflections here? Those are not streaked. These two reflections are streaked. That's a physical impossibility in the same photograph. There's also a second face superimposed here, which you can see. And if we isolate that, you see a couple of interesting things. First of all, I'm wearing glasses, but this face has no glasses. And the point of view of the camera is completely different. This eye is looking off in that direction. Here it is again. This nose is a little cuter than my real nose. It's a little shorter. And there's a dividing line here where there's a third image you can see where the nose is seen from a completely different point of view. Now, one can argue that the camera was handheld, it must have blurred and so on. You can't physically get a camera into that different a point of view within a 25th of a second.
Can you go back one?
Sure.
Does
Question?
anybody see a skull at the bottom in his neck?
Here, hard to tell. It's a superimposition of several images. I try to avoid marginal evidence, generally speaking, and so I'd like to stick to the most robust and obvious and graphic features here. You know, that may be, but I don't see any way to really confirm it. Here's a portrait of a lady, and you can see very vaguely two more eyes here, and another nose. Again, within the 25th or so of a second, you get two completely different faces with a different expression. You have a nose that's off-center and a mouth that has quite a different shape, sort of enlarged on this side. So explain that. I love this one. Here's this lady again with some reflections in her glasses that are just ordinary reflections, and then here's one that's streaked down like this. Again, photographically impossible. What's really fascinating are her hands here, which have been divided into three sections, three hands, and they're completely bizarre. They're seen from different directions at the same time. Three different directions, and the same with the other hands, which are practically not there at all. So again, explain that. Here's another double face. It's the second face isolated. It's kind of hard to see that. This one is truly spooky, where the first face is completely obliterated. Now, another peculiarity of these illuminator photos is that you will see, again, anomalous light streaks that intrude on the photo from the sides. And very often, let's see if I go back, you've got these light phenomena here. And very often you'll see, if there's a vertical behind the head, it will intrude into the figure. Both light and dark streaks, which is very peculiar from a photographic point of view. Now this is a control photo taken with an ordinary camera. And this is the same person taken a few moments later with the Polaroid camera with the illuminator on. Again, you've got this huge illuminated area here, anomalously. And you've got facial distortions here. You've got this whole bulge here, which obviously does not exist in the woman's real face. And there's another control photo and illuminator photo. And these were taken about 5 minutes apart. The woman had taken her sweater off here, so that explains that.
Is that the same camera?
Yes, this is the Polaroid camera. This was taken as a control photo, and this was taken with the intention to produce an anomalous photo. And the control photo was taken with the intention to produce a control photo. And that was the only difference. So that's the short course in illuminator photography. Unfortunately, the developer of the illuminator is now deceased. Mark Macy, who took these photographs, he's kind of retired from the practice, and unfortunately, Polaroid has ceased producing their film, so he's kind of stuck with that. There is a new brand out that tends to reproduce the characteristics of Polaroid film, but I don't know if it's been tested. Excuse me, with Illuminator. And it was only Polaroid 600 film that would work. Who knows why? So that's one very small aspect of ITC, of the visual ITC. And of course the question is this spirit photography? I guess if you define it loosely, in that there must be some consciousness behind these images, because they cannot be reproduced mechanically. They're not photoshopped. They're not photographic artifacts. So there must be some intelligence producing them. Is that intelligence in what we call the afterlife? Thank you. Is it in what we call the afterlife? Is it in some other realm? What do we really know about the spaces and planes beyond our own consensus reality? How do we shoehorn all of that into our familiar concepts and language? I guess all we can do is the best we can do. And personally, my approach tends more toward the empirical and the practical. I don't think we're even ready to theorize about this stuff. I think the most important thing is to collect phenomena, collect information, do really good empirical science on it, theorize, of course, but hopefully not prematurely, because I have a feeling that over the next few years, maybe the next decade, we're going to enter a new phase of understanding about all of this, which is part and parcel of our understanding of ourselves and our own consciousness. And just what it is we're meeting halfway here, and how we're meeting it halfway. And where we are in the first place. Are we really here in this consensus reality? I'm almost convinced that right now all of us here are on the other side. We're just looking through these masks. And that's a pretty tough one to swallow, isn't it? But I think that's kind of how it works, various traditions speak of the illusion of the three-dimensional world and so on. And I'm ready to accept something like that. And we're not that far apart in terms of the actual reality or the actual physics of all of this. That a shift of attitude and a shift of perspective is really all we need to get a much better and truer picture of what's going on, who we are, where we come from, where we're going, why we're here, and all of these wonderful eternal questions that we'd love to ponder. So, questions, please. Yes? Can you stand up and so everyone can hear you?
I've just always been curious to, with all this work and this, centuries of work on it that you're aware of anyway, that in this day and age where there's so many pioneers in science, that is it the lack of money that the people like yourself don't have access to allow them to go further like they do in so many other areas like outer space and God knows what else our country or any other country's doing? Or is it just the inability to come to terms with it? It seems like the things that are being used are basic things that we can all get if we would like to. But I haven't yet seen, and I've seen these types of things this way, where it's just remarkably well done. But I'm curious to know, why is it that there is not more money being put into this area, or is it, would it not be able to be money that actually makes it happen?
That's a really good question. Obviously, money reflects our social priorities and reflects our awareness to a great extent about what's real and what's important. You're right that a lot of this research would not take a huge amount of money. It would take dedication, it would take interest, and I have a feeling that's going to be arising soon. I mean, there are books coming out now by Evan Alexander's book, for example, on his near-death experience and so on. There's a lot of that coming out now. And I think the climate is beginning to, at least I like to think the climate is beginning to shift now to where more serious effort and attention and focus and money can be applied to these things. I don't think we need a lot of money, though. I think we need to know ourselves better, and in doing so, we'll be able to understand and manifest in ways that we're just beginning to have inklings of now. So, Jacques?
Granted that this is going to be a very complex area, but if we take this testimony at face value, shouldn't we expect the entities that are communicating to tell us something about their condition? And is there a contradiction among them, or do they all say the same things? Are they alone? Are they with others? They seem to be with others. Do they communicate? Do they perceive time? I mean, these are things that would be legitimate to ask them if we take it at face value that we have a channel, right?
Yes. And I'm very glad you brought the question up, because personally, from my own experience and from the reading I've done, the people I've met and so forth, it seems to me that the best way to get detailed information from the other side is psychically through the services of good mediums who can be tested scientifically. And some work on this has already obviously been done by Gary Schwartz and others. To me, ITC is more of a proof of concept than a means of getting detailed information. The phone calls and so on are very much an exception. Now, I'm fairly certain that we can bring about conditions that will allow more continuity and more detailed communication. A lot of what you saw here happened in what I call the golden age of ITC, which is around, it was the 80s and early 90s, where so many people were doing it that they created what they called a contact field. And this society developed that was synergetically affecting the ethers or whatever in such a way as to make this easier and happen more frequently. But what happened was that ordinary human issues came up within these groups and fragmented their work, and the contact field collapsed. So what it would take, I think, to restore that is a concerted, consistent effort by people who've done their own personal homework and know how to get along. It's almost corny to say that, but that's the first requirement. There has to be an inner peace, an inner harmony, a genuine curiosity, respect for the scientific method, keeping it clean, all of that. Is that about to happen? I don't know. I'd like to think so. So anyway, in my experience, really good mediumship, until that happens, really good mediumship is the best way to get detailed information. Testimony of those who have had near-death and death experiences, as some of them call it. When you start comparing all these stories, a few things become obvious. One is that, as Jacques asked, what kind of space do these souls find themselves in? From what I understand, it depends. Some souls are in relative isolation, some are in community, some have created by consensus astral worlds, some of which mimic conditions on Earth very closely. And it's an astral co-creation, a psychic co-creation. And I don't think there's any limit to the possibilities there. At least when you look at the consistencies and the inconsistencies over the entire field of these kinds of investigation, I think that's all you can say. That there are overall patterns that hold, and then there are the individual experiences of the individual, which are as unique as they are in life. I mean, I don't know what your experience is like. You project your own image and your own sensory experience on the world. I do it in my own way, from my own background and my own associations, my upbringing and my understandings and my education. You and I could just walk into a strange room for 30 seconds and walk out and say, well, what did you notice? And you'd say, well, what did you notice? And we might not have noticed the same things at all. Or we'd walk into your living room and you would have an entire structure of associations with everything in that room. And to me, it's just a room full of furniture. So, we're always creating our realities in these ways. And I think it's the same thing on the other side. Yes, Bill?
A few things. First, Dan, as someone who has been in it for 23 years doing research, and I have probably 700 documentaries, with 80% of them on the paranormal. And that is right there with any of them. So I really encourage you to get it in DVD and get it out, because it was exceptional. What I looked for is, having gone toe-to-toe many times with skeptics, is how to make it real as possible for them, and you did such a great job in going from sequence to sequence and laying down a foundation, and then bringing in people who were having the experiences, all right? And secondly, I say now is the time. The reason why, there's always been brilliant people. And so my work has been not only as a transpersonal psychotherapist to go see these people, sit with these people, listen to them tell me stories about the ghost in their house or their astral projection or their abduction experience, alien abduction experience, which, you know, we don't talk about that much, even in settings like this enough as far as I'm concerned. But I've sat with over 200 people now. I've been in the room with John Mack, all kinds of people like that. And what I'm looking at is there is an academic model that is still in a box that people do not want to step out of. And this kind of work, there's two books I would highly suggest, and then I'll shut up. One is A Soul's Journey by Peter Richelieu. It's his own personal experience in London, 1941 during the war. But so superior to Eben Alexander's work. Not even close. You know, Eben was a total skeptic until he had his near-death experience. There's a big difference between somebody coming out of the womb, being an older soul, and having a body of evidence. The second one, 1929, The Projection of the Astral Body. Sylvan Muldoon, who was only 25 at the time, and wrote, a brilliant researcher at the time, Hereward Carrington, and said, I read your book, it's amazing, but you devoted 3 chapters on the astral body and gave so-and-so those chapters. He said, I doubt he's even had the experience. And then he goes on to say all the things he's experienced. Carrington immediately writes him, and they write the book together. Now that book has been in print since 29.
Bill, I have a confession to make. You recommended both those books to me years ago, and I haven't read them.
I know.
May I call?
But you're doing this.
Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
What was the title of the second one?
Pardon?
The title for the second one?
Astral projection, the projection of the astral body. Yeah.
Well, you reminded me of Ted Sirios, who probably most of the people in this room know about him. He was an unemployed bellhop from Chicago who was able to project images onto Polaroid film under very stringent conditions. Dr. Jewel Eisenbud sort of took him under his wing, and he was a doctor in Denver, and worked with him for many years and produced a number of books full of very remarkable photos, which have in common with these illuminator photos these telltale distortions, which I find really fascinating, these deviations from photographic reality that tell me that these have not been tampered with. Right, streaks, and the distortions are organic as opposed to mechanistic, and it's the signature of consciousness right there. Yes?
With regard to the illuminator photos, another hypothesis as to what's happening, but also what's happening to maybe Bill Color, is conditioning space. And anytime there's movement with regard to spirals, whether it be water or air, like tornadoes, you see phenomenon happening anytime there's spirals. An illuminator has movement of air in a spiral in a fairly rapid fashion. And tornadoes, you know that straws embedded into bricks and things of that nature. Schoberger in water doing the same types of experiments with the special funnels that he created to go also in spirals, created bluish glows and lifting of objects like levitation, basically. So there's things that are happening when this happens, and this might be a part of the answer. Who knows?
It could be. It could be. But you also reminded me of some other very peculiar class of anomalies that haven't been researched systematically. These occur at traumatic moments. A perfect example would be an automobile accident occurs, and the police find at the scene long lace-up boots that are still laced up, but they're empty. How did the foot get out of that boot? This sort of thing happens. and this is just a very wild theory I'm putting forth here, but it seems to me conceivable that traumatic or sudden events of major planetary importance may involve a momentary merging of multiple realities, which makes it very hard to really figure out what happened. Perhaps the JFK assassination, 9/11, events like that, may be partly a little more mysterious and involving a higher level of coincidence than the physical. I mean, there's been a lot of physical research and political research done, and a lot of it's very legitimate on these events. But for example, what hit the Pentagon at 9/11 is still a subject of contention among the people who've done the best 9/11 research. Some people witnesses swear they saw the airliner. Other witnesses swear they saw a small plane painted like the airliner. Other witnesses say they saw a missile with the airliner flying above it and it peeled off up into the air when the missile hit the building. And these people all they swear up and down that's what happened. Now, is it possible that all these things happened? I don't know, but I think the question has to be asked. And it will only be answered if the FBI gives up their surveillance tapes, which they scooped up within minutes of the event. All, gas stations and other security cameras, boom. They were there right away, scooped them up. What do those tapes show? Now, the standard conspiracy theories provide, some ideas about that. But what if different tapes showed different events? I'm just putting that up for what it's worth. Excuse me, yes, Russell, once again.
You mentioned that analysis of the tapes indicate that the voices recorded don't look like they came from ordinary human body parts.
Yes.
What do they seem to have come from? Did the analysis give you any info as to what the source of these sounds are?
The analysis is kind of funny because this particular analysis is done using software that's used by the FBI to identify nail down the identity of voices in recordings. And what it does is you input the voice and it draws a picture of the structure of the face based on the quality of sound. And it does a fairly good job of this. It's quite amazing. When you put these voices in, it produces a radically distorted image of the structure of a human head. It's just not even in the ballpark. The neck is that fat and the vocal tract is distorted and all that. So it's just one way of visualizing the information, obviously. But that's all they know. We don't know how these things are synthesized. I imagine there's more than one way in which it's being done. I know Alec McRae's device uses a radio system, generates noise, and then filters the noise out to produce the voices. The voices aren't actually even audible in the first stage of the audio output. And then he applies his particular brand of filtering and the voices pop out. Yes, Mary?
You said that the voices are very weak when you first start to record them and then they get stronger. Is that because of us or is that because of them?
I have no idea. Maybe it's just what's habitual gets easier on both sides. I think we can only give general answers to these things.
Do you know? Do you think?
They're obviously using some energy of the physical plane to make changes in the physical plane. Whether a lot of energy is involved, I don't know. Probably not a whole lot. I think probably in things like mediumship, and particularly physical mediumship, using ectoplasm and that sort of thing, we know that a lot of human energy is involved. The Skull people worked on a completely different basis, where mediums and operators were not tired out at the end of the sessions. So, we use terms like energy. What do we know? We don't have the concepts or the vocabulary or anything, but we can collect the data and we can ask the questions. And I think there needs to be more of that. Theorizing is fine, but we have to be unafraid to name name, identify, and tell the truth about what's going on, and to realize that a lot of these things are not paranormal. They happen to everyone. I mean, if half of our neighbors talk to their dead uncle every Wednesday. How would we know about it? You know? Yes.
Thanks a lot, Dan. This is just phenomenal. I really loved your presentation. I hope you go forward with it, as I know you will. I hope it's at a good pace. I'm just struck by this. You definitely mentioned this 1, 2, 3 in there, that the most important was the energy out there, I think, that it's coming from, and us, rather than the middle feature, which is the technology in the middle. I like that emphasis too. And I think it has something to do with the fact that you said that these associations of people that have been so productive have sort of, well, it felt to me like there's a cloud that forms and then after a while it sort of disappears.
Yeah,
And,
that's a good metaphor.
and,
But individuals are still getting good results.
and so in this sense, as far as the last few questions, as far as like how it comes about and what's important, it does seem to be kind of like a strange seesaw. On the one hand, the box of science really wants to, see what our instrumentation is, because that's what's tangible for us. But on the other hand, this great point that you've mentioned, that it has a lot to do with the state of consciousness, hope, care, the feelings, etc.
Of course, yeah. And then this is, by definition, it's a form of mediumship. You can call it that. Like any other. A Ouija board, you could say, is a form of instrumental transcommunication. It is, among other things, a mental crutch. Right? When we project it out on the machine, we're more willing to accept it. And I wouldn't be surprised to learn that some of that's going on here. But the interesting thing about this, and the important thing about it, is the results are recorded. And they can be studied afterward. And that's a big difference. And whether it's important to study the results as opposed to the message, or as opposed to the greater message, that's for the individual researcher to decide. I think it's all important, but I think that the overarching general questions and the general shift in perspective that everything we're involved with is a part of is the most important thing. The new mindset, more expanded mindset, willingness to some extent let go of our bearings and orientation in the concrete world, or what we believe the concrete world to be. I haven't personally encountered in this work any information that there was a whole lot of lower astral garbage coming through. There's stuff that's random that doesn't make a whole lot of sense or that we don't have a context for. I don't think anyone's been harmed by this except by becoming addicted to the process, as people can do with this sort of thing. Some of the more successful efforts, like the skull experiment, which was a remarkable thing that went on for 5 years, it had to shut down at the end because some not so great energies were coming through, and their spirit team on the other side said, "Sorry, we got to shut down the channel. That's the only way to block this." And so the principals of the skull experiment, the Foys, are actually now living in Spain, and they are part of another physical mediumship group that's developing there. So, and they're starting from scratch with a different vibe. One of the things that their team said was that the two couples who were the core group of the skull experiment should not sit together again. They could do their own individual experiments, but that particular energy configuration needed to be broken up to block the nasties, as it were. Yes?
I don't know how many of you have ever worked in a dark room, like with black and white photography, with where you have a set mixtures of the developing and fixing liquids and so forth, and regular black and white paper, and with no image in the darkroom enlarger, you can set an exact time so that every single time you should get a neutral gray developed on the piece of paper after you've fixed it and so forth. Well, this friend of mine at UConn in Connecticut, year after year, she brought her students through the darkroom, and they would sit in the dark and they would focus on these pieces of paper. And each person would create images on those papers that were completely unique to them, and some of them were extremely detailed. I mean, like a surrealistic image with feathers and an eye in the side of a head, and extremely detailed, like so somebody had spent a month working with a pencil to draw this thing. And then her own images were exactly like her paintings. They looked like you were looking at tonsils and caves of tonsils or something. It was very odd. And
this is strictly by being present in the darkroom,
right.
not physically touching, not manipulating the light.
That's
in any
correct.
way.
That's correct.
When
No.
was this done?
This was done at the University of Connecticut. Well, she's passed away now. This was maybe 20 years ago now, and so she did the consecutive years of all of her students, and so I have a whole box of these pictures, and so yeah, they're in Sedona. But in any case, I mean, it seems that we can influence in very bizarre ways, in very personalized ways, these mediums. And so I just thought that would be interesting. Some of you might want to experiment with that.
I'd like to find out more about that.
Yeah.
Talk afterwards. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I was going to ask, you, of course, you went to film the documentary, and this was what years approximately?
Mostly 2004, 2006,
Okay.
around then.
So have you personally, outside of your experiments that you have made or were included in during the documentary, have you personally experimented with recording?
I did a little bit, but I'm very impatient, and it takes patience to do this. And I've been busy with my other work. That's my excuse. And it's not as if I have to prove it to myself. My former partner passed away in 2007, and she communicated in some very interesting ways, including once sort of indirectly by turning the radio on and that sort of thing. So it was very interesting and familiar to me. So I haven't, and again, because I know that you're not going to get a whole lot of detailed information through these means. Or at least that's been my experience, and perhaps my prejudice, I don't know. So I haven't really focused on doing that. But I guess I should, in order to say I have. Yes. Well.
You mentioned one experiment there, one in which you had a shielded room for electromagnetic radiation, and the device was inside of it. Is that correct? Has that been done in other places, other times? Is that only one experiment? But also, it means that, I mean, there have been experiments done where individuals sent through and that. So you're working with a non-local field of some sort.
Right. It's not electromagnetic energy.
It's not electromagnetic, but much of what you talked about is electromagnetic, but could be influenced by it. No.
Well, we don't know exactly where the influence comes in and is then more or less concretized on the level of familiar physics. Tom Butler feels that there may be time manipulation going on, time modulation. If you have broadband noise and you time modulate it, it's almost like if you had a tape of broadband noise and you did put your finger on the tape and did this to modulate it, you would hear a resultant sound. And so maybe one of the ways in which this happens is a subtle manipulation of time. And I'm as a result of this and other studies, I'm fairly convinced that time isn't what we think it is, that time is essentially subjective, and that it only becomes objective when we share a consensus reality in a place where the physics dictate it. We've got planetary cycles and physical rhythms and all that. The physics is very cataloged very well, and we've agreed by consensus to be in this space where time runs more or less mechanically. But that, to me, is not the essence of time. That's a special case of time. And when you look into accounts, different kinds of accounts from the afterlife, where people are in consensus realities, where they live in this city, on this planet, they experience time more or less like we do. the more individual the experience, the more time is sort of a free running thing. And we experience that in our own lives. You know, it runs faster when we're having fun. And I think it's a very, you know, it's not just a glib thing. The experience of time is, I think, the essence of it. And the measurement of it is a completely different thing. It doesn't invalidate our consensus time, and time is very useful in the physical plane. You know, we need to make appointments and run oscillators and equipment at a particular frequency, and that's, you know, it's all useful, but it's not the whole picture. So I hope that's relevant, this question of time modulation. There may be other reasons too. We may be doing the psychic influencing under subtle influence from the sender. I don't know. We're not equipped yet to draw an accurate picture of that, I don't think.
There was only one experiment.
That was, McRae came to the IONS lab in Nevada. That's where that was done, Dean Radin's shielded lab, which is one of the few, you know, heavily shielded labs available. So, Bill?
I thought it was very interesting that when you were working with Bacci and the people would say, oh, that's unequivocally my son, or that's unequivocally my daughter. I knew it immediately. From a skeptical perspective, many times to me it sounded muffled, it sounded distorted. I was wondering, since I have not had the opportunity to interview enough of those people, during your interviews, do you think it was something within the voice inflection or something almost psychically where the mother, the daughter, the son, they would know right away? Because, you know, to me, if I was just looking at that as a skeptic, I'd say, forget it.
Well, a couple of things about this. This was a very tiny slice of a 1-hour documentary that was produced by Italian Swiss television. I didn't do the interviews. Tim and I did not do those interviews. So all we could work with is what we got there. But if you see the whole documentary, you see a lot more continuity. This whole film is shorthand, basically. You know, it's concentrated stuff. Any one of these things could be elaborated. But it's a good point in terms of people watching the film and asking that question. There's almost universal agreement among the participants in Bacci sessions that they have connected with their loved ones. There's detailed information that's come through, voices, voice inflection, and so on. And it's way beyond anything that could have been hoaxed for a whole bunch of reasons. Chuck?
I'm puzzled by something. You've mentioned mediums as maybe a larger form of studying this. In the work of mediums, there are other physical phenomena that happen. Some of them are violent and very large, like a big oak table breaking into, things flying around, temperature dropping, all kinds of other things. This seems, assuming it's the same form of communication, this seems like a very specific, very narrow channel. If we think in sort of Silicon Valley terms again, as opposed to what happens with the medium. Were there any instances of physical phenomena in connection with the recording in your experience?
Not that I know of. There may be, but I've never encountered them. And yes, mediumship is a wide spectrum. And some people dabble in it like they dabble in other things, and for their own reasons, and all kinds of things happen. There are a lot of mediums who are very sensitive and responsible and very good. What's her name? Alison Dubois, whose life was fictionalized in this NBC TV series called Medium. I was filming an experiment at Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona with her, and before the session started, she says, wait a minute, before we start, there's a couple of people here that need to be recognized. So she proceeds to describe my deceased father and grandmother. And that was interesting. And then during a break in the session, she said, Dan, do I have your permission to give you a message from your father? I said, sure, go ahead. And he says, He's with Margaret and he's very happy. And I knew of absolutely no Margaret in connection with my father's life. I thought, it could be someone else. I said, are you sure that's the name? She says, Marge? No, I'm absolutely sure it's Margaret. Okay, so after I go home, I call my half-brother on the East Coast, and I tell him about this. He says, oh, Daniel, he says, you didn't know? I said, no. He says, Margaret was the love of Dad's life. So I thought that was a pretty good hit. And I've had other experiences like that seem to validate mediumship as, if it's done right and in the right spirit, as a valid form of communication. I think it's probably something that we all, or most of us, can learn if we have the patience to do it and the desire. I don't think we're that disconnected from what we call the other side. I think it's mostly a matter of mindset and habit. Yes, sir.
You mentioned there were 3 different types of illuminators for 3 different purposes. What were the 3 different purposes, and why did he do 3 different types?
Oh, yes. Patrick Richards, who was the inventor, the late Patrick Richards, who invented the illuminator. And you see a double image. And the second image of the bookshelf has books on it that the first one doesn't have. And in the second image, there's what appears to be a word in script written over the young girl's face. And it's very fuzzy, but the word anger fits it. So perhaps this was, some kind of expression of anger, inner anger on the girl's part. I have no idea, but so I suspect there may be even other uses for this sort of thing. I don't know that, unless someone else comes with the same knowledge and the same spirit, comes and creates their own illuminator. That's all he made, as far as I know.
Any explanation for how they work?
No, he did. In fact, he called his system Bioluminetics. But he was mostly interested in the diagnostic aspect of it. He contended that if you take a picture of someone and you get these distortions, it means they're out of balance. When they're in balance, you photograph them and it's a clear photo. I can't vouch for that, but that was his theory anyway, and it seemed to work for him. Something else about him. He once, this is lore, I can't prove it happened. He claims that he, as an experiment, he had all 3 illuminators in his place at once, turned all 3 of them on, and just sat in a chair which was back to a wall, and casually leaned back and his head went right into the wall. Scared the hell out of him. He said, I will never do that experiment again. So evidently this, whatever's going on there energetically, and there's not a lot of spin in there. The spin is actually broken. It's almost a direct airflow through there. But there is this particular sequence of homeopathically charged liquids that the air passes through. Some feel there's some ionization process involved. I don't know. But there's nothing more mysterious about the illuminator than that. There's no hidden mechanisms, as far as I know.
Yeah, it seems like there's a time, space-time. There's a Dewey Larson theories of regard to space-time and time-space, so that when you go into this other, in terms of time, space-time, Dewey Larson has this hypothesis of when your atoms and molecules are close to the speed of light in terms of their movements, and sometimes they move over to the speed of light. What he says, they go into time-space, and that's when things get soft and spongy, and that's when the straws go through the bricks and things happen in tornadoes. So I'm thinking that, and I was very intrigued by your comment in which the guy says, and here time passes. And so again, I'm thinking that time in that dimension is totally different than the space-time, consensual time that we have here. And so there's that aspect of it, and I think there's the aspect of things in this other realm, because if you do astral travel, you have this other phenomenon of going through walls, etc. And there's another phenomenon that's very, very interesting. The IAC group, International Academy of Consciousness group, teaches out-of-body travel.
Is the group in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luis Monero, the guy who comes up here, and there's a group in Marin. And one of the exercises they teach, and Bill and Mary have done, and we've all done this, the instructor is in the front of the class, the light dims, and then you spend about 5-10 minutes looking at the person, and you see images form around the person's face. You may see multiple images form. So all this goes in line with all the things that you're saying. It's very intriguing stuff. But astral travel and out-of-body experiences, I think all have this time and sponginess and things changing, happening. So it's all comes together.
I think sponginess is a really good idea to get us out of our sort of intellectual rigidities. And the whole idea of flexibility and softness and variability that we don't normally acknowledge. I think it's something to appreciate and something to focus on. Thanks.
I think one of the interesting things that's been brought up here that you mentioned is this between the dimensions that we've got, obviously two sort of different referential dimensions going on. Time is definitely something that's idiosyncratic to us each, to them and or to whatever they're, and to us different. It's one of the things that really demarks the difference between that space, and this is our reference to time.
One of the little models I have for ITC, the difficulty of it is imagine two railroad trains traveling roughly parallel to each other on tracks that kind of go like that. And the trains are accelerating and decelerating, and occasionally they come into alignment. And in each train there's one open window. And you got to throw a spitball between the two trains in that tiny increment where time and space in one train line up with time and space on the other. And it makes perfect sense that those increments are very small because of the dissimilarities in how these systems function. How the extended communications take place, for example, the phone calls, I think there's a whole other thing going on there. I don't know what it is. Raudive seem to have been able to maintain a consistent, detailed communications through radio, shortwave radio, other radios, telephones, and so on. The interesting thing is that is not his real voice. And I'll go into this in the final sequence of the film. This is apparently a borrowed or created voice and set of inflections and sort of personality structure that is consistent among all of his anomalous communications through these different media, but they don't sound like he sounded like in real life. Tracked down the only known recording of him in his lifetime, which was remember that record that he put out? It was the original German version of that had his voice actually asking the questions. And it's not the voice we hear in all of these consistent communications from him. So that's, the plot thickens.
Yeah.
Why is that? One wild theory that I've thought of is that by borrowing a different personality, he might have been able to get past certain, let's call them gatekeepers. Kind of disguising himself and getting around the gatekeepers, or the gatekeeping physics, if you will, that normally prevent protracted communications. But again, that's, that theory in $1 will get you half a latte at Starbucks. Mary.
When do you think you'll sell the videos? When will they be available?
This video will not be for sale. I'm giving it away. It'll just be on the web. Anyone can see it. It's actually on YouTube on a semi-private channel. But Victor Zammit got hold of the URL, and now a lot of people have seen it. And it's too bad because I didn't want a lot of people to see it before it was done. But it kind of serves me right for dragging my feet on this.
So when the finished one is done, I'm going to take down that YouTube page, and people will just have to find it however they find it. But and it should run, when it's done, it should run about an hour and 20 minutes. So give or take a little bit. My feasible goal is to do one more sequence by the end of the year, and if I can really wrench myself out of my life patterns, I may be able to finish by the end of the year. We'll see. I'd like to think I can do that.
Have you ever seen Robert Vanderbroek's photos?
Yeah.
And have you researched them?
Yeah, this is a young Dutch kid, well, kid, he's now 30, who for all his entire life has been able to produce anomalous photographs on anyone's camera. He has been able to predict the time and location of the appearance of crop circles in his immediate area in Holland, and is one of the most remarkably talented, I don't know what to call him. You know, he's not a classic medium, he's not an ITC practitioner, he's just this magical kid whose parents have been very protective of him, who's been a victim of merciless attacks by the skeptics, but who comes out smelling like a rose when you really test him. Nancy Talbot, who's been researching him for, if you go to bltresearch.org, you'll see page after page of research on this kid with photographs he's produced, many of which include UFO ET references in them. We'll take a picture of the field out back of his house, and superimposed on it will be this diaphanous image of sort of Billy Meyer style UFO, which is probably just more symbolic than anything else. But he also has photographs of deceased people, very good photographs of it, superimposed on the natural scene in front of the camera. And some of them are quite astounding, amazing. Nancy Talbot has been trying to get a film made about him, and it's been, so far, I've seen some of the efforts, and some of the content is really quite spectacular. But when you get into a lot of these areas, the human element and the politics and that sort of thing can get weird. So they're working on it, is all I know. Anything else? Well, one more.
Where in the Netherlands is this boy?
Oh, he's in, in the Netherlands. I'm too tired to remember, but you can just Google up Robert with 2 B's, R-O-B-B-E-R-T, it's the Dutch spelling, Van den Broeke, B-R-O-E-K-E, and then it will come up. So that's it. Thank you very much.